So last night was the Academy Awards. If you're like most people these days, actually, in America, you did not watch it, even though it used to be one of the events that brought all of Americans together. Increasingly, the ratings are collapsing for all sorts of reasons that we can go into at some other point. I bet the number of people who could actually name the film that won best film in the 2022 Oscar ceremony is under 4 or 5%. I actually read it this morning and I've already forgotten it. I was about to tell you, all proud of myself for having done that research, and yet it's already out of my brain. I didn't see that film. I don't think I saw any of the nominees. That's increasingly true for lots of people. So clearly the Oscars have lost a lot of cultural impact, and I nonetheless want to talk about it for a very specific reason, and I'm going to just spend a little bit of time on it because that's all it really deserves, and I'm much less interested in the issue of the Oscars itself than the broader issue that I think it highlights. So just to give you the setup, the issue that I want to talk about is the category of Best Documentary. And I do have a personal stake in this somewhat, which is that my friend Laura Poitras, who directed Citizen4, which was the film, the documentary about the work that I did with Edward Snowden in Hong Kong that won the Best Documentary Oscar in 2015, was nominated for a film about the opioid crisis that I actually expected was going to win. I haven't seen any of these films other than hers, including the film I'm about to talk about, so I want to put that card on the table as well. That film that Laura did, which would have been her second Oscar win, ended up not winning. I honestly don't care. Laura has won every award there is in this world, basically, and she didn't need a second Oscar. But anyway, the film that did win is a film called Navalny, which is a documentary about the Russian dissident who is currently imprisoned because he is an opponent of the government of Vladimir Putin. And you can imagine how popular he is, even though he has said things his whole life that should make him completely anathema to liberal America. He has said some of the most vicious and most bigoted denunciations of the Muslims of the world. He was taken off the list of being a prisoner of conscience by Amnesty because of some of his most recent statements that he refused to recant. But that doesn't matter. Just like liberals are eager to arm actual neo-Nazi militias in Ukraine, all that it takes these days to be a hero is to either be opposed to Donald Trump or be opposed to Vladimir Putin, and everything else is completely irrelevant. And that's the reason they gave this Oscar to this film about Navalny. And I just want to show you what happened, the 2.5 minutes that resulted in them winning.
And the Oscar goes to Navalny. Daniel Royer, Augusta Ray, Diane Becker, Melanie Miller, and Shane Barrett.
Director Daniel Rohr and his team filmed Alexei Navalny while he was in hiding from the Russian government at a remote location in Germany.
Thank you to the Academy. We are humbled to be in the company of such an extraordinary crop of documentary filmmakers. These films redefine what it is to make a documentary. To everyone who helped make our film, you know who you are. Your bravery and courage made this film possible. We owe so much to our Bulgarian nerd with a laptop, Christo Grozev. Christo, you risk everything to tell this story, and it's investigative journalists like you and Maria Pevchik that empower our work. To the Navalny family, Yulia, Dasha, and Zahar, thank you for your courage. The world is with you. And there's one person who couldn't be with us here tonight. Alexei Navalny, the leader of the Russian opposition, remains in solitary confinement for what he calls, I want to make sure we get his words exactly right, Vladimir Putin's unjust war of aggression in Ukraine. I would like to dedicate this award to Navalny, to all political prisoners around the world. Alexei, the world has not forgotten your vital message to us all. We must not be afraid to oppose dictators and authoritarianism wherever it rears its head. I want to invite Julia to say a few quick remarks. Julia?
Thank you, Daniel, and thank you to everybody here. My husband is in prison just for telling the truth. My husband is in prison just for defending democracy. Alexei, I am dreaming the day when you will be free and our country will be free. Stay strong, my love. Thank you.
Okay, all incredibly moving, emotional, and the like. And obviously, I'm sure people in that room, the people who voted for this film, felt very good about themselves. They were taking a stand against Russia, against Russian dictatorship. They all were cheering. The person who directed the film, who won the Oscar, said we need to stand up to dictatorship wherever it rears its head. And yeah, I think one of the things that makes it so notable is that during the Cold War, the idea of whataboutism was often denounced by the US government. And the way they defined that was that they would always claim that anytime you criticized the Soviet Union and its abridgment of basic liberties and rights, the Soviet government would try and distract attention away from that critique by saying, well, what about your problem over there in the United States with how you treat black people? Or what about the internment of Japanese Americans? So they would kind of distract their own citizens' attention away from the critiques of their human rights abuses by pointing way over to the other side of the world, the United States, and they would always say, what about this, what about that, what about this? Now, the idea that that's some sort of Soviet practice that they invented is lunacy. Humans been doing that from the time that they could speak. You say, well, you're kind of a you have this fault, and they say, no, what about my neighbor? My neighbor has it far worse. This is a very human practice. The Soviets did not invent this, but that was always the framework. That was the idea, was the governments do, in fact, use this tactic to distract attention away from their own abuses. It's not just the Soviet Union that does that or the Russian government that does that. It's also the United States that does that. We're experts at it. We love to say things like, we will stand up to democracy, to despotism and tyranny wherever we find it. We will stand up to Navalny, to this person over here in China who's in prison unjustly, or this person here in Iran. And of course, the United States has always had and still does have its own dissidents in prison. And one of the leading ones, for example, is Julian Assange. And so it seems very strange to me, very strange, to have a room full of people cheering not just the film, but themselves for it's a very empty and cowardly thing to do, to denounce the government on the other side of the world over which you have absolutely no influence. Denouncing Vladimir Putin or President Xi or the Iranian mullahs really doesn't do anything to change those governments. You have no influence there. It's not a brave thing to do. You're not in danger there. You don't live in those countries. It's always been the case that foreign countries that are enemies of one another criticize each other. That's all this is. What takes a lot more bravery, and that's a lot more consequential, is criticizing the human rights abuses of your own government. And if you don't ever do that, if instead you're constantly focused on the human rights abuses of other governments, it actually empowers your own government to engage in the same human rights abuses, because you're constantly reaffirming its narrative that it's only those bad countries over there that imprison political dissidents and political opponents. We absolutely do the same. Julian Assange is in prison in part because he exposed the crimes of the United States government, but also because, and I think this is really the bigger part, is in 2016 he published documents that helped Donald Trump win the election and Hillary Clinton lose the election. Because before that, many Democrats and people on the liberal left were very much in support of Julian Assange. And now it's almost impossible to find anyone on the liberal left willing to stand up in defense of Julian Assange. And the only thing that changed was that he did journalism that helped defeat Hillary Clinton. That is the classic case of being a political prisoner. The Biden administration is doing everything possible to keep him in prison for as long as possible, despite never having been convicted of a crime. And it is unimaginable that these same Hollywood liberals would give an award to a dissident like Julian Assange. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update. Catch our full shows for free, live weekdays at 7 p.m. Eastern on Rumble, and join our locals community at greenwald.locals.com for all of my written journalism, exclusive after-show Q&As, and more.